Tales from Africa. How Pakayana the spider got his small waist. From Liberia. Once in the old days there were two neighboring villages, Kemojav and Momojav, which prided themselves on the great festivals they held each year. The festivities in Kemojav took place at the same time as the festivities in Momojav. From the surrounding countryside, some people went to one village for the celebration, and some went to the other. It came about that a great rivalry grew up between Momojav and Kemojav. Each one tried to outdo the other with its festival. On the last day of the celebration, there was always a great feast, and the visitors were invited to eat as much as they wanted. Pakayana the spider was a famous eater. He was always hungry. Whenever he saw food, he ate it. And never did he eat so much as at the annual feast in Kemojav and Momojav. Sometimes he would go to one village and eat, sometimes to the other, but even after filling himself, he was still hungry. One year, Pakayana decided that only if he ate both at the Kemojav and at the Momojav feast would he get enough to satisfy him. But the villages were some distance apart, and it took time to get from one to the other, and one never knew exactly when the eating would begin. So he contrived a plan which would permit him to eat at both villages. He hired 2 men to help him, and he brought enough rope to stretch from Kemojav to Momojav and cut it into 2 lengths. He tied one of the ropes around his waist and gave the end to one man. He tied the other rope around his waist and gave the end to the other man. Then he instructed them this way. One of them was to go to Kemojav, the other was to go to Momojav. When the eating started in Momojav, the man who was there was to pull on his rope. When the eating began in Kemojav, the man stationed there was to pull on his rope. That way, Pakayana would know which village was eating first. He would go there and eat his fill, then hurry to the other village to continue his eating. So one man went to Kemojav with his rope, the other to Momojav with his rope, and Pakayana stood halfway between the 2 villages. Pakayana was very satisfied with himself. As he waited, he couldn't help but think of the rice, goat meat, beef, and chicken that were being prepared at the festivals. Time went by, and Pakayana waited. He became irritable and angry that the signal didn't come from one direction or the other. At last, however, something happened. The feast began in Momojav, and at precisely the same moment the feast began in Kemojav. The 2 men whom Pakayana had hired began to pull on their ropes. They were very strong men, and they tugged very hard. They pulled so hard that Pakayana couldn't move in one direction or another. He just bobbed up and down in one place. The 2 men were stubborn and persistent as well as strong. They kept pulling and pulling. The ropes up around Pakayana's waist were getting tighter and tighter. For a long time in Momojav and Kemojav the people ate. Finally they were finished. Only then did the 2 men stop pulling. They went back to where they had left Pakayana, and they found him lying on the ground moaning and gasping for breath. They took the ropes off of him, but where the ropes had squeezed him around the middle, Pakayana was now very thin, with half of his body swelled out above and half swelled out below. And thus Pakayana remains to this day with a tiny waist. Whenever people see it, they remember the time Pakayana tried to eat at the feasts of Momojav and Kemojav at the same time.